The Complete Works of Swami Vivekananda, Volume 3, Section 4, The Mission of Vedanta. On the occasion of his visit to Kumbakonam, the Swami was presented with the following address by the local Hindu community. Reserved Swami. He, on behalf of the Hindu inhabitant of this ancient and religious important town of Kumbakonam, we request permission to offer you the most hearty welcome on your return from the West world to our own holy land of great temples and famous saints and sages. We are highly thankful to God for the remarkable success of your religion mission in America and in Europe, and for his having enabled for his having enabled you to impress upon the choicest representatives of the world's great religions assembled at Chicago that both the Hindu philosophy and the religion are so broad and so rationally Catholic as to have in them the power of exalt and to harmonize all ideas of God and of all human spirituality. The conviction that cause of truth, the conviction that the cause of the truth is always safe in the hands of Him who is the life and soul of the universe, has been for thousands of years part living of our living faith. And it today we rejoice at the result of your holy work in the Christian lands. It is because the eyes of men in and outside of India are thereby being opened to the inestimable value of the spiritual heritage of the preeminently religious Hindu nation. The success of your work has naturally added great luster to the already renowned name of your greatest Guru. It has also raised us in the estimation of the civilized world. More than all, it has made us feel that we too, as a people, have reason to be proud of the achievements of our past, and that the absence of telling aggressiveness in our civilization is in no way a sign of its exhausted and decayed condition. With clear sighted, devoted, and all together, unselfish workers like you in our midst, the future of the Hindu nation cannot but be bright and hopeful. May the God of the universe, who is also the God of all the nation, bestow on your health and long life, and make you increasingly strong and wise in the discharge of your high and noble functions as a worthy teacher of the Hindu religion and philosophy. A second address was also represented by the Hindu student of the town. The Swami then delivered the following address on the mission of the Vedanta. A very small amount of religious work performed brings a large amount of result. If this statement of the Gita wanted an illustration, I am finding every day the truth of that great saying is in my humble life. My work has been very insignificant indeed, but the kindness and the cordiality of welcome that I have met at every step of my journey from Colombo to this city are simply beyond all expectations. At all at the same time, it is worthy of our tradition of Hindus. It is worthy of our race. For here are we, the Hindu race, whose vitality, whose life principle, whose very soul has it where is in religion. I have seen a little of the world, traveling among the races of the East and the West, and everywhere I find among nations one great idea which forms the backbone, so to speak, of that race. With some, it is politics. With others, it is other social culture. Others again may have intellectual culture and so on for their national background. But this, our motherland, has religion and religion alone for its basis, for its backbone, for the bedrock upon which the whole building of its life has been based. Some of you may remember that in my reply to the kind address which the people of Madras sent over to me in America, I pointed out the fact that a pleasant in India has, in many respects, a better religious education than many of the gentlemen in the West. And today, beyond all doubt, I myself am verifying my own words. There was a time when I did feel rather discontented at the want of information among the masses of India and lack the thirst among them for information. But now I understand it. Where their interest lies, there they are more eager for information than the masses of any other race that I have seen and I have traveled among. Ask are pleasant about the momentous political changes in Europe, the unhavels that are going on in Europe society. They do not know anything of them, nor do they care to know. But the pleasant, even in Ceylon, detached from India, in many ways cut off from living interest in India, I found the very pleasant walking in the field there, were already acquainted with the facts that there had been a parliament of religion in America, that an Indian sannyasin had gone over there, and that he had had some success. Where therefore their interest is, there they are as eager for information as any other race, and religion is the one and sole interest of the people of India. I am not just now discussing whether it is good to have the vitality of the race in the religion's ideals or the political ideals, but so far it is clear to us that for good or for evil, for our vitality is concentrated in our religion. You cannot change it, you cannot destroy it and put it place another. You cannot transplant a large growing tree from one soil to another and make it immediately take roots there, for good or for evil. The religious ideals has been flowing into India for thousands of years. For good or evil, the Indian atmosphere has been filled with ideals of religion. For shining scores of centuries, for good or evil, we have been born and brought up in the very midst of these ideals of religion, till it has entered into our very blood and tingled with every drop in our veins and has become one with the constitution, become the very vital of our lives. And can you give such religion up without the rousing of the same energy in reaction, without feeling the channel had which that mighty river has cut out for itself in the course of thousands of years? Do you want that the Ganga should go back to its icy bed and begin to a new course? Even if that were possible, it would be impossible for this country to give up her characteristic course of religious life, and take up for herself a new career of politics or something else. You can walk only under the law of least resistance, and this religious line is the line of the least resistance in India. This is the line of life, this is the line of growth, and this is a line of well being in India. To follow the track of religion. Yeah, in other countries, religion is only one of many necessities in life. To use the common illustration which I am in the habit of using, my lady has many things in her parlor, and it is fashion nowadays to have a Japan vase, and she must procure it, and it does not look well to be without it. So, my lady or my gentleman has many other occupations of, and also a little bit of religion must come in to complete it. Consequently, he or she has a little religion, politics, social improperment, in one word. This world is the goal of mankind in the West, and God and religion come in quietly as helpers to attain that goal. Their God is, so to speak, the being who helps to cleanse and of furnish this world for them. This is the apparent all the value of God for them. Do you not know how for the last 100 or 200 years you have been hearing again and again out of the lip of the man who ought to have known better, from the mouths of those who pretended at least to know better, that all the argument they produce against the Indian religion is this, that our religion does not conduct too well in this world, that it does not bring gold to us, that it does not make us robber of nation. that it does not make the strong stand upon the bodies of weak and feed themselves with the lifeblood of the weak. Certainly our religion does not do that. It cannot send cohorts under whose feet the earth trembles, for the purpose of destruction and pillage and ruination of races. Therefore, they say that what is there in this religion? It does not bring any grist to the grinding mill, any strength to the muscle. That what is there in such a religion? They little dream that that is the very argument with which we prove our religion, because it does not make for this world. Ours is the only true religion because, according to it, this little sense world of 3 days duration is not to be made the end and the aim of all. In is not to be our great goal. This little earthy horizon of the few feet is not that which bounds the view of our religion. Ours is always beyond and still beyond and beyond the senses, beyond the space, beyond the time, away, away, beyond, till nothing of this world is felt, and the universe itself becomes like a drop in the transcend ocean of the glory of the souls. Ours is the true religion because it teaches that God alone is true, that this world is false and fleeting, that all your gold is what has dust, that all your power is infinite, that and that its life that life itself is oftentimes an evil. Therefore it is that ours is the true religion. Ours is the true religion because above it teaches renunciation and stands up with the wisdom of ages to tell and to declare to the nations who are mere children of yesterday in comparison with us Hindus, who own the horrier antiquity of the wisdom discovered by the ancestry here in India, to tell them in the plain words, childrens, you are slave of senses. There is only fitness in the senses. There is only ruination in the senses. The 3 short days of luxury here brings only ruin at last. Give it up. Renounce the love of the senses of the world. That is the way of religion. True renunciation is the way to the goal and not through the enjoyment. Therefore, ours is the only true religion. Yeah, it is curious fact that while nation after nation come up upon the stage of the world, played their parts vigorously for a few moments and dead almost without leaving a mark or ripple on the ocean of time, here are we living as it were an eternal life. They talk a great deal of new theories about the survival of the fittest, and they think that it is the strength of the muscles which is the fittest to survive. If that were true, any one of the aggressive known old world nation would have lived in glory today, and we, the weak Hindus, who's conquered even one other race or nation, ought to have died out. Yet we live here, 300 million strong. A young English lady once told me, what have the Hindus done? They never even conquer a single race. And that it is not at all true that all its energies are spent, that atrophy has overtaken its bodies. That is not true. There is a vitality enough, and it comes out in torrent and deluge the world when the time is ripe and requires it. We have, as it were, thrown a challenge to the whole world from most ancient times. In the West, they trying to solve the problem how much a man can possess, and we are trying here to solve the problem on how little a man can live. This struggle and this difference will still go on for some centuries. But if history has any truth in it, and if prognostication ever proved true, it must be that those who train themselves to live on the least and control themselves well will in the end gain the battle, and that those who run after enjoyment and luxury, however vigorous they may seem for the moment, will have to die and become annihilated. There are times in the history of men's life, nay, in the history of the lives of the nation, when a sort of world wearing becomes painfully predominant. It seems that such a tide of world wearing has come upon the Western world. There, too, they have their thinkers, great men, and they are already finding out that this race after gold and power is all vanity in vanity. Many Many make most of the cultured men and women there are already wearing of these competitions, this struggle, this brutality of their commercial civilization, and they are looking forward towards something better. There is a class which still clings on to political and social changes as the only penance for the evil in the Europe, but among the great thinkers there, other ideals are growing. They have found out that no amount of political and social manipulation of human condition can cure the evils of life. It is a change of the soul itself for the better that alone will cure the evil of the life. No amount of force or government or legislation cruelty will change the condition of the race, but it is a spiritual culture and ethical culture alone that can change the wrong racing tendencies for the better. Thus, these races of the West are eager for some new thoughts, for some new philosophies. The religion they have had, Christianity, although good and glorious in many respects, has been imperfectly understood and is an understood hitherto found to be insufficient. The thoughtful men of the West find in our ancient philosophy, essentially in the Vedanta, the new impulse of thoughts they are seeking, the very spiritual food and drink for which they are hungering and thirsting, and it is no wonder that this is so. I have become used to hear all sort of wonderful claims but forward in favor of every religion under the sun. You have also heard, quite within recent times, the claim put forward by Dr. Barrows, a great friend of mine, that Christianity is the only universal religion. Let me consider this question a while and lay before you my reasons why I think that it is Vedanta and Vedanta alone that can become the universal religion of men, and no other is fitted for the role. Accepting our own accepting our own, almost all the other all the other great religions in the world are inevitably connected with the life or lives of one or more of their founders. All their theories, their teachings, their doctrines, and their ethics are built round the life of the personal founders from whom they get their sanction, their authority, and their power. And strangely enough, upon the historicity of the founder's life is built, as it were, all the fabric of such religion. If there is only one blow dealt to the historicity of that life, has been the case in the modern time with the lives of almost all the so-called founders of religions. We know that half of the details of such lives is not now seriously believed in, and that the other half is seriously doubted. If this becomes the case, if that rock of historicity, as they pretend to call it, is shaken and shattered, the whole building tumbles down and broken absolutely, never to regain its lost status. Every one of the great religion in the world, excepting our own, is built upon such historical characters, but ours rest upon principles. There is no man or woman who can claim to have created the Vedas. They are the embodied of eternal principles. Sages discovered them, and now and then the names of these sages are mentioned, just their names. We do not even know who or what they were. In many cases, we do not know who their fathers were, and almost in every case, we do not know when and where they were born. But what cared they? These sages for their names, they were the preachers of principles, and they themselves, so far as they went, tried to become illustrations of the principle they preached. At the same time, just as our God is an impersonal and at a personal God, so is our religion a most intensely impersonal one, the religion based upon principles and at with an infinite scope for the play of person. For what religion gives you more incarnation, more profit, more seers, and still waits for infinitely more. The Bhagavata says that incarnation are infinite, leaving ample scope for the many as you like to come. Therefore, if any one or more of these persons in India's religious history, any one or more of these incarnations, any one or more of our prophets are proved not to have been historical, it does not injure our religion at all. Even then, it remains firm as ever because it is based upon principles and not upon persons. It is in vain we try to gather all the people of the world around a single personality. It is difficult to make them gather together, even round eternal and universal principles. If it ever becomes possible to bring a large portion of humanity to one way of thinking in regard to religion, mark you, it must be always through principles and not through persons. And as I have said, our principles and as I have said, our religion has ample scope for authority and influence of person. There is that most wonderful theory of Ishtar which gives you the fullest and the freest choice possible among these great religious personalities. You may take up any one of the prophet or teacher as your guide and the object of your special adoration of your special adoration. You are even allowed to think that he who you have chosen is the greatest of the prophet, greatest of all the avatars. There is no harm in that. But you must keep into the firm background of eternally true principles. The strange fact here is that the power of our incarnation has been holding good with us only so far as they are illustrated of the principles of the Vedas. The glory of Krishna is that he has been the best preacher of our eternal religion of principles and the best commentator on the Vedanta that ever lived in India. The second claim of the Vedanta upon the attention of the world is that of all the scriptures in the world, it is one scripture that teaches the teaching of which is the eternal harmony with the result that have been attained by the modern scientific investigations of external nature. Two minds in the dim past of the history, cognate to each other in the form and kinship and sympathy, started being placed in different roots. The one was the ancient Hindu mind and the other the ancient Greek mind. The former started by analyzing the internal world. The latter started in the search of that goal beyond any analysis of the external world. And even through the various vicissitudes of their history, it is easy to make out these two vibrations of thoughts as tending to produce similar echoes of the goal beyond. It seems clear that the conclusion of the modern materialistic science can be acceptable harmonizingly with the religion. Only the Vedantists or the Hindus are called. It seems clear that modern materialism can hold its own and at the same time approach spirituality by taking up the conclusion of Vedanta. It seems to us and to all who cares to know that the conclusion of the modern science are the very conclusion of the Vedanta reaching ages ago. Only in the modern science they are written in the language of matter. This then the another claim of the Vedanta upon the modern Western minds. Its rationality, the wonderful rationalism of the Vedanta. I have myself been told by some of the Western scientists scientific minds of the day how wonderfully rational the conclusion of Vedants are. I know one of them personally who scarcely has time to eat his milk and go out of his laboratory, but who yet would stand by the hour to attend my lecture on the Vedant. For, as he expressed it, they are so scientific, they so exactly harmonize with the aspirations of the ages with the conclusion of the modern science in coming at the present time. To such scientific conclusion drawn from the comparative religion, I would specially like to draw your attention to the one bears upon the idea of the universality of religion and the other the idea of the oneness of things. We observe in the histories of Babylon and among the Jewish and interesting religious phenomena happening. We find that each of these Babylon and Jewish people was divided into so many tribes, each tribe having a god of its own, and that this little tribal god had often the generic name. The god among the Babylonians were called as Baals, and the among them Baals, Merodach was the chief. In course of time, one of these many tribes would conquer and assimilate the other racing allied tribes, and the natural result would be that the god of the corresponding tribe would be placed at the head of all the gods of the other tribes. Thus, the so-called boasted monotheism of these Semites was created. Among the Jewish gods went by the name of Moloch. Of this, there was one Moloch who belonged to the tribe called Israel, and he was also called the Moloch Heaven and Moloch Heva. It in time, this tribe of Israel slowly conquered some of the other tribes of the same race, destroyed their Moloch, and declared its own Moloch to be the supreme Moloch of all the Moloch. And I'm sure most of you know the amount of bloodshed or tri- tri- tyranny and of brutal savage that this religion conquest attended. Later on, the Babylon tried to destroy the supremacy of the Moloch Havoc, but could not succeed in doing so. It seems to me that such an attempt at tribal self-assertion in religious matter might have taken place on the frontier and the India also. Here too, all the various tribes of the Aryans might have come into conflict with one another for declaring the supremacy of their several tribal gods, but India's history was to be otherwise, was to be different from that of the Jewish. India alone was to be of all lands, the land of toleration and spirituality, and therefore the fight between the tribes and their gods did not long take place here. For one of the greatest sages that was ever born found out here in India, even that the distance times which history cannot reach and into whose glooms even traditional itself dare not peep. In that distant time, the sages arose and declared, Ekam sad vipro bahuda vadanti. He who exists in one, the sages call him variously. This is the one of the most memorable sentence that was ever uttered. One of the greatest or grandest truth that was ever discovered. And for all Hindus, this truth has been the very backbone of our national existence. For throughout the vistas of the centuries of our national lives, this one idea, Ekam Sadavipra Bahuda Vadanti, comes down, gaining in volume and in fullness till it has permeated the whole of the national existence, till it has mingled in our blood and has become with us one. We live that grand truth in every vein, and our country has become the glorious land of religious toleration. It is here and here alone that they build temples and churches for the religions which have come with the object of condemning our own religion. This is the one very great disciple that, or very great principle that the world is waiting to learn from us. Yeah, you little know how much intolerance is at abroad. It struck me more than once that I should have to leave my bone on foreign shores owing to the prevalence of religious intoleration. Killing a man is nothing for religion's sake. Tomorrow they may do it in the very heart of the boasted civilization of the West. If today they are not really doing so, outcasting in its most horrible forms would often come back down upon the head of the man in the West if he dared to say a word against his country accepted religion. They talk glibly and smoothly here in the criticism of our caste laws. If you go to the West and live there, as I have done, you will know that even some of the biggest professors you hear of an errant crowds and dare not say, for fear of the public opinion, a hundredth part of what they hold to be really true in the religious matter. Therefore, the world is waiting for this grand idea of universal toleration. It will be the great inquisition of civilization. Nay, no civilization can long exist unless the idea enters into it. No civilization can grow unless fanaticism, bloodshed, and brutality stops. No civilization can begin to lift up his head until we look charitably upon the charity is to look charitably and kindly upon the religious convictions of others, nay, more. To understand that not only should we be charitable but positively helpful to each other, however different our religious idea and convictions may be, and that is exactly what we do in India, as I have just related to you. It is here in India that Hindus have built and are still building churches for Christians and mosques for the Mohammedans. That is the thing to do. In spite of their hatred, in spite of their brutality, in spite of their cruelty, in spite of their tyranny, in spite of the wild language they are given to utter, we will and we must go on building churches for the Christian and mosques for the Mohammedan until we conquer through love, until we have demonstrated to the world that love alone is the fittest thing in to survive and not hatred, that it is gentleness that has the strength to live on, to fructify, and nor merely brutality and physical force. The other great ideas that the world want from us today, the thinking part of the Europe, nay, the whole world, more perhaps the lower classes than the higher, more the masses than the cultured, more the ignorant than the educated, more the weak than the strong, is that eternal grand idea of the spiritual oneness of the whole universe. I need not tell you today, men from Madras University, now the modern researcher of the West, have demonstrated through physical means the oneness and solidity of the whole universe. How? Physically speaking, you and I, the moon, the sun, the stars are but little waves and wavelets in the mightiest of the infinite ocean of matter. So, how Indian psychology demonstrated ages ago that similarly, both body and mind are but mere names and let little wavelets in the oceans of the matter. Some samashti and how going one step further, it is also shown in the Vedanta that behind that idea of unity of the whole show, the real soul is one. There is but one soul throughout the universe, all but the one existence. This great idea of the real and the basic solidity of the whole universe has frightened many even in this country. Even now finds sometimes more. It is one great life-giving idea which the world wants from us today, and which the mute masses of India wants for their uplifting. For none can regenerate this land of ours without the practical application and effective operation of this idea of oneness of the thing.